Hey there, happy painters. It's time to get salty. If you saw my drawing and color mixing video that I just completed, you'll know what's going on here. But for those of you who are just stepping in, um, I made a salt painting a couple days ago, and now I want to try and incorporate some graffiti lettering into a painting for the first time. So I've drawn a salt shaker here, and then I've drawn graffiti of the word salty in the background, because I love my puns. So for my one thing, my sticky note, I've got the word graffiti, and that's going to be my focus for this painting. The one thing that I want to do differently, that I've never done before, and the one thing that I want to focus on and try to get better at, and ignoring all other things if they try to impose. So I'm not spending all of my mental RAM trying to get my edges better than ever before, or match colors better than ever before, or get an accurate drawing more accurately than ever before. I'm choosing to do one thing, one single change, one single focus on this painting, and that's to incorporate the graffiti art and hopefully make it look good by the end. So I've got my colors mixed, and now what I need to decide is, number one, where I want to start, and then number two, what brush I want to use to do it. I think I want to start with the graffiti, and the reason for that is, I don't know, I just want to see it come together. I also wish I'd started with the graffiti and the drawing, and I regretted not doing it. So I'm going to see if I can learn from my mistakes and start with that here. And then the other question is what brush I'm going to use. And there's no right or wrong answer to what brush you choose when you're doing a painting. But different brushes do have benefits over others. As a general rule, I consider it good to paint with the biggest brush that you're comfortable with, and to stretch your comfort level by trying other brushes. Now, you're going to be sacrificing detail when you go bigger, and that's okay. You want the gesture to be correct more than the details, so it's not a big loss. Another great thing about using big brushes is you cover a lot of area way faster than otherwise. Doing a painting, this is a 9 by 12, I think, 11 by 14. I don't know how big this is, but doing this with a teeny tiny brush would take me so long. And so a big brush helps me to get in and out better. And the way I paint, I do like a first pass and then a second pass. So it doesn't matter for me anyways if my first pass is really detailed. I'm just kind of getting the basics down, so might as well use a big brush for that, right? Now I do take a little bit of care not to like glob the paint in a first pass, because that could give me a little bit of trouble later. I might have to wrestle with just a bunch of gloop if my first pass is very, very thick paint. So I've learned to try and go a little bit more lightly in the beginning. I've learned that through mistakes. I say this a lot, but like, your mistakes are your greatest teachers in painting. And so don't live in fear of making them. They're the surest way to get better. The surest way to get better is to do the types of things that might result in a painting disaster. That way you're being bold. You're trying new things. You're not just repeating the same painting process, the same painting subject that you've done for 20 years, whatever. You already know that's going to be a win. You're a master at that already. But mixing it up and doing things that might fail, that might not be worthy of Instagram, that might make people question if you're as good of an artist as they thought you were. We need to put our ego on the altar if we want to really improve our craft. And I think putting your ego on the altar is absolutely necessary for happiness as a painter too. It's way too easy for us to wrap up our identity in if other people say that we're a good artist or if we consider ourselves to be great. I think it's better to look to other things to fulfill yourself than your talent as an artist. I think art works really, really well when you use it as a source of happiness. And obviously, some of you have ambitions or are already, doing this for a living. And I respect and understand that easier said than done, a lot of the stuff that I just said. There's a lot of pressure that can come into play when you're painting for your livelihood. I get that. I'm not sure if I have the answer for how to make everything better with the difficulties we have as painters, the internal struggles that, we spend years wrestling through. I don't know. I'm not sure if I have novel insights there, other than you're not alone. You're not the only person to struggle with that. Painters at every single level struggle with that. And you can't paint your way out of those insecurities or questions, however you want to call it. You can't paint your way out of that. You got to find another way to make peace with your practice, with how you think about yourself, if you love yourself or not. I don't know if paint can fix that for you, or I don't know if accolades can fix that for you, or fix that for me, for that matter, because obviously I struggle with all that stuff too. I'm trying to retain a little bit of these shadow shapes in here. That's what these lines are kind of coming up. I haven't decided yet how much shadow I want to incorporate into this, but I have a feeling the more shadow I put in, the better and more realistic this is going to look. The more these two very different subjects are going to kind of come together. Sorry guys, we lost a little bit of this recording. Apparently my iPhone was full. So you may have missed a little bit of my process. I apologize for that. And what was I talking about? I think the last thing that I mentioned in this was that specific colors aren't extremely important to me during the first pass and even the first mixing. My goal is to kind of get the lights and darks where I want them more or less. And then after I do my first pass, I'll do a second mixing. And that's where I'll kind of shore up my colors, make changes, get them closer to where I want. And that's just a process that's worked well for me. I also mentioned that I wasn't much of a brush mixer, so I'm not altering my colors too much as I'm going. It's something I want to experiment with more next year. We're almost at the end of 2019 as I'm recording this, so thinking a lot about my art goals for next year. And one of them is to be a little bit more dynamic with my colors as I paint, to do a consistent examination as I lay down paint of, does this need to be warmer or cooler than it is now? Do some mixing, lay it down, compare. Do this constant comparison as I lay stuff down. I don't really do that yet, and I think I'll paint better when I do. So that's one of the goals I have for next year. I'm gonna tackle some foreground and background elements now, and so I need to decide the line where I want the back to be. And let's see. So I've done it differently in both of my models. The thing that I'm looking at right now is just on a white piece of paper, and so you can see a line right there where the paper starts coming up. In my Procreate painting that I did, I actually set the graffiti as like kind of a standing element with the background behind it. And I do like how dynamic that looks. It's kind of cool. So I think I'm going to make that same decision in my painting and make the background kind of start right there. Yeah, that's cool. Get some teal on there. I love that color teal. I think that's so pretty. Remains to be seen how I think it looks compared to this garish yellow and orange. So things might change, but I tend to do well when I lay a bunch of colors down and then can step back and look at the whole picture. Colors are interesting. They're totally relative, which means that a color can look totally different depending on the context it's in. What colors are next to it, what kind of light is shining on it. That changes a color dramatically. I'm sure you've seen those optical illusions where you've got like the chessboard and then a shadow being cast from an object, but the shadow of the white is the same color as the black in the light, if that makes any sense. Maybe I'll try and superimpose a picture of what I'm talking about up there, in case I'm not describing it well. But it just goes to show how different colors can look depending on the situation they're in. And so looking at the colors on my palette, they may look great. I may have like, that teal there. But then when I lay it down on the canvas, it might suddenly look like super green or something like that. Depends on what's next to it. What kind of background do I have? What kind of light do I have on my canvas? What color's right next to it? Makes a big difference. Do some foreground. I still don't know if I love this shadow color that I mixed up, but I'm still gonna lay it down right now because I think I like the darkness of it. I think the value is good, the darkness and lightness of the color. So I'll put it on and I might make it more colorful of a color later. This is coming along nice and quick. I love it. I don't have quite as much painting time as I usually do because we're entertaining guests right now. It's 2 days before Christmas as I record this. And I'm still kind of new to recording my voice and having a video presence and an online presence. And I experienced stage fright. I thought I was going to do all this recording in the morning while we had company over. And I kept getting cold feet and finding different things to do throughout the morning. I kept getting busy with other stuff because I didn't want anyone else to hear me talk. which is so funny because, I'm hoping thousands of people are hearing me talk in this painting. But, man, having one guest over, like, behind my shoulder freaked me out. I think I'll probably get used to that as time goes on. It is kind of a weird and interesting thing, though. The idea that I'm painting and talking out into the void, in a sense. I know it doesn't seem that way to you. You're listening to this right now, and we're having a good old little conversation. But from my perspective, I'm kind of talking to my computer like a crazy person. I'm nuts. But I'm surprised that it's actually not too difficult for me to paint and talk at the same time. It's a little harder for me to wax eloquent on a subject, but the actual painting, not too tricky for me. My mentor does it all the time, and she always did it well, and I know that she's very talented at it. I wondered if I would have that gift or not. I think I do. For the glass portion, I want to make a decision about my graffiti colors first, because I'd rather not paint that twice if I can help it. So what I'm doing right now is I'm leaning back and taking a look at what I have right now. To be honest, I do not love these colors, especially compared to the Procreate painting that I did. I love the lightness and the crispness, and some of that lightness may be impossible for me to achieve in paint, just because the lighter I go, the more color is going to wash out of this. But at the same time, I think I can afford to go lighter on a lot of these elements. And there's a neat way to test that, actually. So I'm going to take just a random brush, and I'm going to get some titanium white, unmixed, totally pure, and I'm going to put it on the lightest part of my subject. Usually that's some kind of a reflection, and in my case, it is. So I'm just going to drop some white right here. And the reason that's going to help me is that's the absolute lightest that I can go on this painting. There's no way for me to make anything lighter than that. And that means if I want there to be interesting light and dark contrast, then I need to use this as my baseline. If I start brightening this up so it's the same exact brightness as that, then this is not going to pop anymore. And pop is important. It brings life to your painting. So I'm squinting right now and looking at my canvas. And then I'm looking at my subject. I'm trying to see, do I have room to make this lighter and this lighter and preserve some of that dynamism? And I think I can. So I'm going to make this lighter. I'm probably going to make this lighter and less saturated. And this, bleh. I don't like that at all. So I'm going to do something drastic with that orange. Yeah, okay. So that helps me decide a little bit better where I want to go. So I'm messing on my canvas now, and I'm going to do a little bit of mixing. I'm sorry I don't have a camera on that at the moment. But I'll tell you what I'm doing. And maybe I'll wax eloquent for you. Talk about some other philosophical art topic as I am wont to do. I'm making my yellow lighter right now, and I do kind of like how it's getting a little bit more of like a soft banana-y kind of tone to it. It's less McDonald's French fry, McDonald's road sign color now. Yeah, I like that so much more. So much more. So maybe I'll try to match my Procreate study color for this top part, because I liked that, I didn't have any problem with that. And that's like kind of a soft, peachy sort of deal. So we're not going to need a whole lot of orange to achieve that. In fact, a little bit of orange is going to eat up any yellow that's in there, because the red paint I'm using is a very dominant red color. It's a bossy red, as I like to say. Okay, good. So now I've got an orange that's just a little bit oranger and a little bit darker than my yellow. And I'm going to mix some more paint in. That way I have more paint to use. Throw some titanium white in there to cool off my color a bit, to dull my color a bit. Anytime you mix paint, it's going to dull your color. And anytime you mix white, it's going to cool things off. Alright, so let's revisit the yellows again, because I want to paint this before I do a second pass of everything. That way I'm just not rushing ahead. No single part of the painting is jumping in front of anything else. I'm going to do away with this guy now and do a smaller brush. But still fairly big. This is a size 6. So it's going to take me longer to paint now, but I'm also going to have a bit more control. I accidentally dabbed some of my orange on there, and I want to paint the yellow part. Alright, so let's get some cool banana yellow on here. And this gives me a chance to refine my drawing a little bit. It's still called a drawing even though it's paint. I know that's confusing. And I'm not crazy hung up on the drawing for this. It doesn't matter to me if it's super duper accurate. It's also easier to do your drawing when you have a big canvas. I personally think painting big is much easier than painting small. It's more forgiving. This is giving me a little bit of the same effect that I had with my Procreate study, which was the graffiti was so light, it almost seemed to be a light source. As though it was like a neon sign or something like that. And I don't know if I love that or not. It's not an intentional choice on my part. But this is getting me closer to what my study looked like. So I want to talk a little bit about studies, and I also want to talk about digital art, because I think those are both very interesting subjects. I don't do a ton of studies before I paint, but when I do, I think my paintings are awesome. Not to brag or anything. For some reason, when I've already painted something once, when I've already made decisions on how I want something arranged or what colors I might use, all of that stuff, I think I end up with a better subject. Quick hiatus. I'm going to mix a shadow shape, a shadow color for my yellow now. I decided a while ago that if I do cast a shadow over my graffiti, it's going to make everything look a little bit more believable, that everything is together and related. And so, looking at the shadow cast on my real life salt shaker, the yellow is quite a bit darker, and it's got quite a bit more, well, it is kind of a warm shadow, interestingly enough. So I'm going to try to convey that by making sure I don't just turn it into a dull green. I'm going to mix in some red in here as well. And if I hate it, it's okay. I can always redo it. Let's see here. Yeah, that looks nice and shadowy. It's funny, looking on my palette, it looks red, but looking up here, it looks, I don't know, blue. It can really help to just like put a test dab on your painting and then judge the color from there. Because if you look at your palette and then look at the painting, but don't put any paint on, you can be so surprised when you actually do put the paint on. It's too muddy for my tastes. So I'm going to try and yellow it out and lighten it up. When you mix in yellow, it lightens things. Alright, so we'll try that. I'm going to try to not paint too thickly because I have a feeling I'm going to be returning to this shadow, potentially adjusting my color. This shadow mixture will give me a little insight into what kind of yellow I want to have here too, because it's going to be duller. Just like this shadow has less color in it. Okay, and then there's a cast of shadow here where you sort of get the shape of that salt shaker. Pretty cool how there's like a middle point that doesn't have cast shadow. Maybe showing some TLC to that area will make this whole thing more believable. Another thing about painting is when you're just starting off or halfway through, you might think your painting looks like total trash, and maybe it does look like total trash. There's something in painting called the ugly phase, or the ugly stage of the painting, and it is true, man. Before you finish and everything gets wrapped up and lovely, sometimes your painting looks real wonky. It can be discouraging when you've already put a lot of time into a painting and then you look and, oh my gosh. But sometimes all it takes is, just another half hour of love, and it fixes all the things you thought were absolutely horrendous. Most of the time, at least. We're digging into the glass now. As I said, when you're looking through glass, the color behind it is different in value. It's either darker or lighter, usually a bit darker. And also, always the color through the glass is duller. So if you pull some of the color out, it's going to look way more believable. Believable. There's a kid in middle school who used to always do this hilarious saying. We were both on the middle school basketball team, and we would, do these bus rides to other schools, and He had this catchphrase. He would say, "Unbelievable! I can't believe it." It was so funny. So, unbelievable. Before I got off on some color mixing and other tangents, I was about to discuss digital art, and I was going to discuss studies. And so I'll jump back to that now that we have gone on our crazy tangent. As I said, I don't do a lot of studies. A lot of times I just dive into it. And I think that's something that's going to change for me over time, because every time I do a study, I'm so glad I did. And I mentioned that one of the benefits of doing your studies is that you're making the decisions ahead of your final painting piece. You're deciding what colors might look good. You're deciding maybe where to put a really strong shadow to make a powerful effect. You know, it's endless how many decisions you can make on a painting. But a lot of times the one big thing we could use more of while we're painting is, the ability to focus and not have to juggle so many decisions. And that's the beauty of doing some studies, is it offloads some of those choices. You've already made the choices, so you don't need to think about it. You can think about the next challenge. I'm obviously very big on the idea of minimizing your decisions. So, yeah, that's one of the cool things about studies. And digital art, I think, is a fantastic way to do studies because you can knock it out. It's way, way faster than traditional painting because you don't have to mix colors and you're not handling a brush and doing this and that. If you've done it before, you know. Digital is so much faster. Crazy faster. And another benefit of that speed difference is that digital artists get better at painting way faster than us traditional folk. I hope that's not a controversial thing to say. Maybe it is. But to me, it's indisputable, undeniable. And the reason I think the digital artists are better is because they do more art than we do. They iterate more frequently on their art, if that makes sense. Iteration, how would I define that? Making constant small changes to their process and to their style. When you work digitally, you can do 3 paintings for every one painting that us traditional folk may knock out. And so you're just getting more art done, you're making more mistakes, you're making more decisions, you're making more good choices, you're reinforcing more. And that gets you better faster. It's wild. If you're a purely traditional person, I encourage you to maybe find a handful of digital artists on Instagram or something that, just have interesting art to you. And it's just stunning to see how many amazingly good digital artists there are, and at very young ages. And of course, by that, I'm not saying that digital art is superior to traditional art in any way. Honestly, I don't use our iPad too much. I love paint. I love the feeling of paint. I love having the tangible finished product afterwards. I don't quite feel relaxed doing iPad art as I do doing traditional stuff. And that's just me. Your experience may vary. Kyle Heath Incorporated is not responsible for any loss of limb or damage related to digital art. Sorry, I'm in a silly mood today. I'm a bit loopy. I think I had my coffee too late. So anyways, yeah, that eternal question of what's better, digital art or traditional art, I think they're both amazing and wonderful, and you should do both of them. And doing both of them will improve your art practice in both of them as well. If you're a traditional painter, then doing some digital stuff is wonderful for studies. It's wonderful for getting better faster at all the aspects of painting: color, value, edges, shapes, whatever. And if you're a digital artist, see, I'm not much of a digital artist, so I don't know if there's like a gigantic benefit to doing some traditional stuff. It would probably give you a much better understanding of color. Maybe mixing pigments helps you to get color better. I don't know though, I'll have to ask some of my digital buddies. A lot of the people in my life drawing class are digital boys and girls. And so they can probably tell me how traditional painting has affected their growth. I'll report back. Alright, so let's see. Decent first pass. I've got pretty much everything covered up. I gotta decide what to put down there. I think my shadow shape, shadow color might be a good touch right there. And then a lot of the colors down here are pretty much the same as these ones on the side. So I'll dip back into those. You may notice that I don't blend much. My style of painting is very much put a drop of paint down and then, for the most part, don't touch it. I don't know why I started doing it like that, but I think I'd read from somebody that your paintings look more dynamic if you don't overblend. And I kind of took it to the extreme and decided to pretty much never blend. And thus a bit of a style developed. But I do occasionally like practicing with rendering more and doing some good blending. So some of my stuff may look a little bit more finished in the future. The other thing I need to do is to do a first outline of Salty. I wasn't sure when and how or what I was going to do with that, but now's probably a good time to do that. Oh, I also decided I hated that orange, and I pre-mixed a replacement. So I'm going to scrape away some of this to make it as easy as possible for me to put some new paint down. I took care to not slather paint the first time, but still paint's going to go down a little bit better if I expose some of this canvas. This is a canvas panel that I'm painting on, and I painted some red and white acrylic paint over it. That's why it looked pink. And the reason why I put acrylic paint on is number one, because I like how the paint feels. the oil paint feels going on top of the acrylic. And also, I like having a toned canvas, especially with a funky color, because I intentionally leave certain areas of my painting exposed. So when you look at this finished painting, you'll still see pink pops in a couple spots. And usually I'll try to leave those in like interesting places where I want to catch your eye. It's an intentional decision to not cover up everything. That's another thing I use the first pass for, is to take a look and decide like, okay, what looks like a really cool win in terms of some pink popping out? Because if you just paint willy-nilly, everything's going to end up getting covered. But if I look here, there's some interesting effects and textures, I think, from like these bottom areas. Even maybe this hint of charcoal still poking out with that pink. And if I decide, keep this, after my first pass, it's more likely that I'll intentionally not overpaint those areas and have a cool pop at the end of the painting. I'm going to stand up for a minute and get some more paper towels. Standing up for a second was just a huge benefit for me. It allowed me to see this painting from further away, and the painting looks way better to me further away than it does up close. The salt shaker reads very clearly. I like the shadows, the colors that I chose there. This is coming together well. I'm happy with what's going on. So let's keep going with this thing. I would love to finish this before my guests arrive and I start getting cold feet again. Start feeling nervous about my voice. Okay, so I want to repaint this orange, and I've got a mixed orange to do that. I think it's going to be a subtle difference compared to the yellow. But I think that's a good choice. On my study, it was a subtle difference, and I think it ended up looking pretty cool. Mind you, I'm still considering this to be a first pass. So I probably will come back and repaint this. So I'm not concerning myself too much with if I like my brush strokes or not. I do need to mix a shadow color for this orange too. So I'm going to do that right quick. We're in South Carolina, and there's some funny isms here with the way people talk. One that just totally blew my mind when I lived in North Carolina, which a quick Kyle story. I grew up in Southern California, and then we moved to North Carolina because my mom and dad wanted to open up a toy store there. They were in the toy store business. And so we moved to North Carolina, and then I ended up here in South Carolina for school. Anyways, so now you know a little bit more about me. But when I moved to North Carolina, I could not understand some people when they talked. I didn't know what they were saying. Their accent was so thick. I'd never heard Southern before. And one of my friend's dads at the time was a good old boy. And he was telling us that he used to be able to do something, but now he couldn't. And the way that you say that in the South is, I used to could. I used to could, but now I can't. There's so much character and personality in the South. I used to could. So maybe one day I'll be telling my grandchildren, I used to could paint real good, but now I can't. Oh man. You're getting less paint instruction on this video and more stand-up comedy. Bad stand-up comedy. I apologize. At least I'm not throwing puns out today. I've been known to go on pun runs. A pun spree. Thankfully, you watchers have been able to avoid that so far. So there's all kind of interesting brushstroke textures that are appearing because of the smaller brush I'm using and the way I'm quickly applying paint. And I have a habit of doing this vertical, horizontal kind of thing as opposed to diagonal lines. Sometimes that makes areas of my painting look almost pixelated. And occasionally I'll just go with that. Make it look really pixelated. But the reason I say that is I'm not sure if I want texture on this graffiti or if I want more of just a flat color. And that's a decision I'm going to have to make on my second pass. If I want more flat color, I'll have to blend more. Maybe use a different brush or do these long sweeping. See how it kind of flattens out when I do that? Whoop. Then you may pick up another color. So I'll have to decide if I want my graffiti to look like one flat color, which would probably make it look more like traditional graffiti, or if I want to maybe use brushstrokes to do something different or to attract the eye. Whenever you have active brushwork, the eye is going to be drawn to that area. Part of what will decide that for me is, what do I want to be the focal point of this painting? It's always good to know what your focal point is from the beginning and not just figure it out at the end. For me, as much as this graffiti in the background is spunky and garish, I don't necessarily want the graffiti to be the focal point. Probably want the salt shaker to be, right? And so if that's the case, I'm going to have to make sure that the salt shaker has enough contrast to stand up to these bold, loud colors in the background. How am I going to do that? I can flatten the brushwork of my graffiti. That way I'll have more active brushwork in the salt shaker area. and the eye will be drawn to that. I can tone up some of the colors on the salt shaker. Find some spots that, maybe on the outside rims of the glass, the salt, the metallic areas, and pump up my color there. Or I can push back some of these colors and make them more dull. I can also use value contrast. So I can make my darkest darks and my lightest lights on this guy, and then kind of tone things back here. And it's a pretty strong way to signal your focal point to a viewer. Now, if that's the case, if I want this graffiti to be the background, and I do, I want this to be a background element, as cool as it is, then I may want to actually use kind of a gray for the outline rather than black. Black is obviously going to be the darkest thing on the painting, and so if I mix a gray to use for the graffiti, that'll allow me to put some punchy blacks on the salt shaker. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm taking most of my black, leaving a little bit for some elements for the salt shaker. I'm going to mix a bit of white into this and make it more gray. My next step is going to be doing an outline. Now it's still, on the palette it looks gray, but here it still looks very black because it's clearly the darkest object that would go on this. So I'm going to lighten it even more. I used a gray for my Procreate study, so I've got a good baseline. Yeah, there we go. Actually, it looks really similar in color to the metal. So I guess I could have just used some of my metal colors for that. And now I'm going to start the outline. I'm excited about this part. This is also a part that I'm afraid I might mess up, because oil paint is blendy. If I'd used acrylic, then I could put dry paint on dry paint. My life would be easier. But here I have to deal with blend and stuff pushing around. But what a good challenge. Alright, so I'm going to put my head in the frame. That way I can focus more. Do I have a bald spot yet? Let me know in the comments. And this is actually really satisfying. I love filling in lines. Alrighty. If you're interested in lettering and you don't know a whole lot about it, one really interesting thing to look up is advertisements from the Art Nouveau period, which I think is like the early 1900s. I'm not 100% on that. But that's like kind of, I don't know, what I guess you could call one of the golden ages of lettering. If you've ever heard the name Alphonse Mucha, he was around back then, and he had these gorgeous advertisements, basically. But they were these beautiful women with beautiful letters and these sumptuous borders around the painting and stuff. Pretty cool. A lot of people don't know that posters from like the 1960s, like band posters, like Jimi Hendrix posters and the Grateful Dead and that kind of stuff, a lot of them were heavily inspired by Art Nouveau ads. A lot of them being direct copies of the style. So you can probably imagine what like a Jimi Hendrix poster might look like. You know, wild, wavy letters that are almost impossible to read. Like crazy, vibrant colors. I don't think Art Nouveau did crazy, vibrant colors, but they were into illegible letters sometimes. More for the effect than for, the readability. Kind of cool. It's a neat little rabbit hole to fall down. History of calligraphy and hand lettering and stuff. My wife is really into hand lettering. She actually does so she's an accountant by day. And they've got like a blackboard there where they'll announce events or welcome new accountants and stuff. And a lot of times she'll be the person in charge of, doing cool lettering for the messages for the company and stuff. It's amazing, man. She's so good. I love good hand lettering. Wow, that's pretty neat. I like the pop of that. I need to decide what color I want to use for these lines here. And so far, the decision I've been making through the glass is a little bit darker and a little bit duller. So, black is the dullest color you can get. So, you're not gonna pull color out of a pure black. But we can go darker by taking some of this black I left aside. And then we'll just mix a little bit of my gray into it. The reason why I still want to mix is if I don't and I put a pure black there, your eye is going to be drawn to that thing. Maybe that's good. Maybe I'll reinforce it later with a pure black. But right now my goal is to convey glass. So I'm going darker and duller. So let's take a look at my real life salt shaker for a minute. And yeah, it does this very cool curve. Something like that. Maybe not my finest hour, but we'll see. Okay, and then we've got, interesting, yeah. We've got a curve going up here, and then down, and around, and then coming back. I'm sure I'm going to have to redo that, but then right here, curvy, curvy. That's awesome. Those curves make me happy. I don't think I did a great job at them, but I love the effect. Love it, love it. That's going to convey that this is like twisty glass kind of thing. And then let's see, any other opportunities for black? Yes, we've got black right there from this being reflected down. And then the same thing right there. Yeah. Those little touches are going to go a long way. be a little subtle when it comes to glass. I don't want to convey glass just by doing an outline or something. And so the way I choose to be subtle is by darkening and dulling the colors there. And the viewer's brain is totally going to do the rest. Totally. All right. I'm scooting back. And what do we think about this first pass? What don't I like about it is a good question. I think these oranges in the shadow need to be darker to show people that this is a cast shadow. I need to make sure I include I forget what they're called, but the darks that have absolutely no light coming in should be extremely dark right at the bottom of these elements. Occlusion shadow, I think that's the word for it. How about my value statement, my lights and darks? I think I'd already decided earlier that I want the foreground to be lighter. I might try to make the salt a little bit lighter in certain areas too. I can't make it too much lighter than that, otherwise I'm going to start competing with the highlights that I'm going to put down. But yeah, so I'll make a little bit less contrast here, maybe lighten that up a bit. I'm going to make different color decisions around these edges as things go on. Keeping these pops, probably add more color to that shadow. Yeah, other than that, I might make some interesting outlines here and do a revisit of this salty to make it more flat. But yeah, we have a roadmap to where we want to go. I think this painting has promise. Alright, let's hop to it. So, I'll start by painting a little bit more traditionally, like my traditional process method, which would be to go inside to the outside. I think I've got enough information here now that I can start expanding outward, and that'll save me time on the edges of the final piece. I won't have to do a third pass where I do tons of blending in areas that I want to be softer. I can handle some of those now. Alright, so for starters, let's look at the top of here. And one thing that I've neglected to add here is that some of the light of this orange is reflecting off the top there. So that means that this area should look lighter because there's light hitting it. And also it should look oranger because there's orange light hitting it. So let's take, as a baseline, that color that I used. And now, let's orange it a bit. Let's light it a bit. I'm mixing in orange and white. And let's test some of that. Better. Yeah. That's better. I like it. Okay. So, let's draw my outline with that color. Very cool. And don't do in 2 strokes what you can do in 1. You'll automatically look like a better painter if you paint confidently and quickly. There's a good bit of orange reflecting off here, so I want to convey that by doing an oranger mixture in that spot. And then let's keep drawing. I want to keep a little bit of that pink because I think it's cool. let's see. Let's go orange there. I'll lighten up even more in that area right there. Do a little scoop. Okay. So I need a mixture that's a little bit oranger for this swoop. It's pretty subtle. There we go. I can see some orange in that. And then I'll do another of those swoops. Right there. Alright, and then mix some titanium white and we'll go lighter. And that'll be for an area around right here. Doesn't look much lighter. I think I need more paint on my brush. Painting on top of paint is a little bit tricky. It gets harder and harder. The more paint you glob on, the trickier it is to make it stick. And that might be one of the arguments for getting it right the first time. The more you go back to it and touch it up, the more it's just going to kind of turn into a weird glob. And when you put your brush down, it's not going to be the color you expected. It's going to be a mixture of the two. I'll show you one of the things you can do to help your paint stick. Get this stuff. This is solvent-free gel medium. And if you mix in a little bit of this into your paint, no more than 25%, then the paint sticks a little better. It's a great trick for when you're doing highlights at the very end. Let's see if this sticks a little better. See that? Just gives it a little bit more stickiness. Now, it's not stinkiness. I think I'm so funny. Okay, cool. Now, I want this to be even lighter right on the edge. So I'm going to mix in more white. I personally like flat brushes a lot. I've experimented with others too. I have some filberts at home. I have some rounds at home. But I really like the sharp lines I can make. I like the precision. I like how the brush shapes actually look. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see me use a lot of flats in my paintings. I do want to mess with rounds a little bit more down the road though. I don't feel like I've given those their fair shot yet. Alright, I need some mid-tone metal colors now. We'll give a little more TLC to the right edge. Like I said, this painting isn't going to look super duper finished when I'm done, maybe compared to other artists, because I don't really like a super finished painting. Especially, I don't like the process of getting there. So, by the end, expect expect there still to be a lot of untouched shapes of color and interesting lines. That's my goal. I still want you to see shapes at the end if you look up close. But then if you back away, I want you to see a salt shaker. And your brain will tell you this salt shaker is more detailed than it is. That's a really crazy effect, but it's true. Your brain is really good at filling in details that aren't there, and it actually loves it. It's like a game for your brain. So you can use that to your advantage as an artist. Number one, because it saves you time. You don't need to put in spurious, unnecessary details all the time. And number two, you're giving the viewer's brain a little gift by not going super detailed, because the brain loves to fill in the gaps. Any guys out there meet a girl and she seems like an absolute goddess because you don't know anything about her? That's probably the same effect. No offense to the girls, I just know that's certainly something I've done. She's perfect, dude. She's absolutely perfect. Do any of us really want to be worshipped by a member of the opposite sex, though? It's one matter to be respected and treated like a human, but I don't think I would want an adoring fan. Don't want to be a god. Not that I have a face where that would be a problem. Alright, so one of the areas where I can put my darkest dark is probably these little salt shaker specks up at the top. But I'm concerned that they're going to look like they don't belong if I don't put them in the right place. So I'm going to actually hedge my bets a little bit and gray it down a bit. And I'm going to think before I do some touch-ups. I'm bracing my finger against the canvas for a little bit more accuracy. Sometimes people use like a cane over the top of their painting, or something called a mahl stick. M-A-H-L stick, I think. It's like German. Those are ways that you can get a little bit more accurate. And this is easy enough for me to paint over if I just hate it. It's funny because it's a perspective thing. So yeah, these should be getting closer together as they go away from the eye. I don't know, this is the kind of stuff I don't like to do. But it's probably very important for believability. So if I don't like it, let's get it good the first time. It's also possible that people will just see the specs and say, oh yeah, salt shaker. And my work will be done. Does that look total wackadoo? I do think there are some errors. Well, I know there's some errors. That dot needs to be higher, and this dot needs to be higher. But let's see if I can get away with that. Let's see, now what gray was I using for these little touch-ups. Let's try that. Yeah, that works. Probably a little too blue. Let's mix in some orange there and try again. When you mix in orange, it neutralizes the blue. Okay, yeah. That'll work. That'll do, pig. I don't know what that's from, but I know that's a saying. That'll do, pig. That'll do. Okay, now let's get a real orangey gray for the left side of the salt shaker top. And then I think we'll be able to move along. I'm taking more time than I expected here because I'm really enjoying this area. Having fun. Painting is fun. I like it. Now let's reinforce this reflected light. And then I'm going to come back there for highlights at the end of the painting. But we're ready to move on. Let's move along. And I'll just move straight down this salt shaker until we're done with it. So now let's see. I like a lighter color of yellow right there for where that catches the light. So I'll take some of my graffiti yellow. Graffiti yellow reminds me of Bob Ross saying like happy blue. We'll take our graffiti yellow. And I intentionally left some pink there because I want some pink popping out of this. This is a nice point of contrast here because I have a very dark, and a very light, light. So when this whole painting's done, this is where your eye's going to go. That's where I'm concentrating all the points of highest contrast. And in a sense that decision was made for me by the subject. It's how it looks in real life. But I can tweak that kind of stuff too to guide the viewer's eye wherever I want it to go. Okay, and then while I've got this color, put some touches there. Another good candidate for my solvent-free gel, because I'm having trouble getting this to stick. That's better. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm liking where this is going. We're getting salty. Alright, I do need to speed up though, because we're going to have guests walk in here. And I'm going to get all shy. So let's do some of these shadow shapes. And for that, I think this is my mixture. Let's do a test. Nope, that's not right. This is right. Yeah, okay. Another thing that's really powerful to keep in mind when you're painting is to try to intentionally create shapes with your brush strokes. So I'm not just thinking about covering up a certain area as I'm painting. I'm also thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I did a little S kind of swoopy thing right there? So that's one of the things that I intentionally save some of my mental RAM for. Actually, I do it subconsciously at this point. But making these really interesting brush shapes, rather than just covering an area and trying to convince people it's a salt shaker, that's a cool way to add some dynamism to your piece. See how I just did like a big curving V there in one stroke. If a viewer gets his or her nose down and really looks at your piece, man, that kind of stuff is just a delight, I think. One guy who was just masterful at that was John Singer Sargent. He was a portrait painter, primarily back in the early 1900s, if you haven't heard of him. And he would make these cool brush strokes. It's just fun to look at. You could tell he had a blast painting. So that's something you can experiment with too, is, can I make my brush stroke dense? Dense. Can I make it say something? Pretty powerful. Alright, this is coming together a bit. Now I'll go for the non-shadowy portions. And I'm going to get more solvent-free gel to help with this sticking situation. I don't feel too bad about going real thick here. You'll see that the brush strokes I'm using in this area are probably the chunkiest I've used so far. And that's because that's another way that I can create contrast in this painting. If a lot of my painting has comparatively less paint, and then I have these big globs in this area, where do you think people are going to look? Right where I want them to look. We got them. They're looking at my globs. I'm glad no one's here in the house right now to hear me say that. That's between you guys and me. Looking at my globs. I'm grossing myself out. All right, what do we think? Yellow and black next to each other is a tricky challenge. But that's probably the best I can do with it, with the time I want to invest. And I think I want to leave this pink curve here too as a stylistic choice. Alright, so next, let's finish up our salt. Yeah, finish up our salt. Okay, so squinting and looking at the salt, the top right here is the lightest part. So let's, my brush is a little bit yellow still, even though I rinsed it off. So I'm going to give it another touch, because I'd rather this salt look a little bit blue. Although the top part, I guess, would catch yellow light, so might not be a bad thing. That's a bit yellow. And then, so the edge of our salt against the glass does something kind of like that. Yeah. like to go thick in some areas, get some interesting textures. Okay. Spots down here where it's a little bit lighter. Be right there. And then I said I wanted some of these areas to be a bit lighter. So I'm going to add a bit more white to that mid-toned area. I also wish it were bluer. So I'm going to mix in some more blue. Just a touch. Just a touch. We're dealing with white. So a little bit goes a long way. Okay. Teensy bit more blue. I think we'll be there. Yeah, that's a good shadow salt. So let's draw our shadow line. Nice, confident brush stroke. Curve down there. And let's, whoop, hope that wasn't loud. I want to use a bigger brush for part of this. My other brush is probably too contaminated. But I've got another brush here. Let's do something crazy. Something that might totally stand out from the rest of the painting. Alright, so I've got a big brush stroke right there. Cool. I want to leave some of that pink. It's a style choice I decided on earlier. And then I want to play around with color a little bit in this space. I've got some pinkish white mixed up already. But I'd like for more subtle variations. And there's a neat little brush movement, a cool swoop that happened right there. And I'm going to use that to inform the way I fill in this area. It's going to look less realistic because I'm doing that. But I think the stylistic choice will be interesting to a viewer. I think they'll like it. And then let's go even crazier with some color. Let's get some of that pink. And maybe as it comes down, it starts to get a little pinker right there. Totally exposed brush stroke. We don't need to clean that up. That's cool. If realism was our goal, we'd want to clean that up. But we want to make something beautiful and interesting. That's my goal. Alright. Maybe a bit too dark. Put a softer pink right against that. And then, let's see, is there any other color I could throw in there? How about, let's go a little bit more yellow in the top. I think that'll give us the dance of color that I'm looking for right now. The dance of color. top is in the light, almost being hit directly, so it's going to be lighter. Cool. And now I just want to reinforce a bit of shadow right there. I love these stylistic swoops though. I think the viewer is going to enjoy that. I know I enjoyed making it. And I think they can tell when we enjoy ourselves. Whoop, too dark. Let's see, that's probably the ticket. That'll do. And then just one more touch of yellow right there to really communicate that we're looking at the edge of the glass. I think it's important that I have a good line there, so I'll get more of my yellow. Okay, yeah, that looks more like we're looking at the edge of glass. But remember, it's important for me to convey glass through this, even if I'm being stylized. Alright, so now we need to do a little bit more work on the edges of this, and then we'll be done with the salt shaker. Looking at some of the colors, I can probably push more greenish teal in some of these spots right here, and maybe like kind of a dark dull green on a couple of those edges. So let's see, I have a gray over here that looks pretty greenish. I think that might get us there. Yeah, like that. So we're gonna whoosh. That's pretty dark. I think that's darker than I want. So we'll brush mix some white in there. And let's take a second crack at that. Doesn't look too different. Some more white. Okay, we'll go with it. I'm putting some solvent-free gel medium so our paint sticks a little better. And what other areas have that green? Those areas. Now I'm going to take some of my background and put some of that teal in like a lightened form on the salt shaker. That'd be especially awesome if you saw more of the background, because it would tie this piece together well. Some good color sharing, but still good here. Okay. Too colorful probably, which is amazing looking at the palette. It looks so dull. Not in a bad way. Looks so neutral. So I'm mixing red into this green to gray it off a bit. Yeah, that'll work. Now for the top here, I want kind of a bit more brown going on. I have a bit of a brown candidate from that drop shadow. So let me do a touch of that and see what I think. Yeah, that's good enough. Not a huge area of focus, so I don't need to be crazy careful with color. I'm going to put some touches in here to, yeah, I think that was the only spot where I wanted that. Maybe a touch right there. And then get some dark green for the left bottom. Nice contrast. Nice. And then I'll use that same dark green for some occlusion shadow down here. And then I'll do a touch of black also. Okay, home stretch, we're getting closer. I'm going to take a bit of a break now to make sure my phone is charged and make sure everything's recording all right. BRB. And we are back with a recharged phone, a recharged artist. It's a new day. Just to date this video, this is the morning of Christmas Eve. So, happy almost holidays to you guys. I am recharged and ready to go on this lovely morning. It's the most wonderful time of the day. There'll be coffee for drinking, and showers for stinking, and fun things to say. I'm not usually this chipper in the morning, so I don't know what's going on. Alright, so we are revisiting this piece under new light, much better light. I love painting with daylight as opposed to lights from indoors. And for that reason, as often as possible, I like to paint before 3 o'clock in the winter time, because then I've got cooler light and better light to judge my colors from. So I feel so luxurious now looking at this painting under daylight. We're getting pretty close here, so I'm going to work to finish some of this stuff up and call it a win. I'm happy with everything in this salt shaker. I may do a couple touches of just fun colors in certain spots, but we'll see about that. And I think I wanted to do maybe a little bit more orange light off on that left corner. Oh, let's turn on the light for my model. Very good. And okay, one of the things I want to do before I'm done is shore up this foreground, and I want to use a lighter color slightly than I had before. I don't remember if I mixed white for this to lighten it up yet or not. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm going to add a little bit more white to that. I don't think I did yesterday. So let's get some of this here. And another thing I'm going to do for this second pass of the foreground is I'm going to use a jumbo brush. I want to add some variety to this painting. I love using big brushes on wide foreground and background elements. So I'll grab this 2-inch big brush that I got from the hardware store and lay in some big swaths of color for the foreground. And to help me out, I'm going to put in a little bit of solvent-free gel also into my mixture. Mix this guy up. I have company coming in a few hours, so this is my one last hurrah to finish a good painting and then clean up this downstairs so my wife doesn't get mad at me. No, she's very understanding of my art mess. Okay, so let's do a big old brush stroke right there. Variation is great for paintings, for making them more interesting. You want to find a nice balance between having variation, but also having some uniformity in elements throughout your paintings. If you have way too much variation all over the place, then your painting is going to look disjointed. But there's a sweet spot, balance between doing similar elements throughout the piece that don't have variation. For example, color sharing, where I might have little pops of orange in different parts of the piece. Having, similar brush strokes in different parts of the piece. Whatever you want. Just having a certain continuity through the piece pulls it together, but then also varying some elements will make the piece more interesting and add opportunities for contrast and all of that. So it's this mixture of variation and uniformity of the elements in your painting. Okay, and then let's get some big, bold strokes inside this shadow. And then I'll touch up with a smaller brush. I'm not quite getting the coverage I want to out of this big brush, and I need to be careful that I don't lose control and paint into an element that I've considered basically finished. Okay, so now I'll get my biggest size of flat synthetic brush. We'll use this for the final elements of the foreground. I'll start with my light. I think I'm going to focus on putting horizontal lines in this element here. I heard from one artist that the direction of brush strokes that you add can influence the feeling people get from the piece. I think he said that horizontal brush strokes make a painting seem more calm, and vertical ones make a painting seem more energetic. I'm not really familiar with the psychology behind all that, but I thought it was pretty interesting. Something to keep in mind. Maybe if you want a calm feeling in your piece, try doing primarily horizontal brush strokes. Isn't there some psychology about horizontal and vertical lines making you seem slimmer or fatter too? I'm not totally sure which is which, but just funny stuff. I don't want super active brush strokes, I don't think, for my foreground. I'll save the craziness for my salt shaker. But I might do a little bit of palette knife work in the foreground. And I may use that as an opportunity to add a little bit of variation in my colors, because the foreground is looking a little flat. You know, obviously not a bad thing. Yeah, let's do that now, just so we can call this done after we've worked it a bit. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'll mix in some cooler versions of this light pink. And so to cool it down, we'll mix in a blue. I'll use some of the blue background, that teal color, and see what that does. Let's do a cool palette knife swipe. Hopefully this won't dominate the piece, but one of my goals for the coming year is to get better at palette knife work. I'm not strong with the palette knife, to be honest. I haven't figured out the control aspect, and it's something I want to. There's a local artist here. Her name is Jessica Fields, and she does palette knife landscapes, and they are so cool. It's amazing the control she gets. You should definitely check her out. She comes to my life drawing group sometimes, so I'm acquaintances with her. But whenever I see her control with the palette knife, I just, goals. I want to be like her. She also has a huge following. She's very famous. It's weird to have relationships with artists that are, quote-unquote famous. It's funny because they're normal people. There's no reason to get starry-eyed over somebody. They're more like you than you realize. Same insecurities, same, day-to-day concerns. There are two artists in my group that are, quite famous. There's a guy who's in my drawing group who's a real famous concept art designer. Or I guess it's not concept art. He doesn't come up with a concept. He does the finished pieces usually that other people have brainstormed and all that. So he's a digital guy. He does digital art. But yeah, just a normal person. People get all starry-eyed over you on Instagram, but we all poop the same way. My wife always rolls her eyes when I say weird stuff like that on video in front of thousands of people. She's always nervous about the one final thing that I add to my YouTube videos at the end to keep people watching till the end. Always doing something weird. Yeah. Okay. Palette knife stuff is a little weird and, maybe not masterfully done. But I do think it makes the foreground a little more interesting. We'll go with it. Decide how hard or soft I want this shadow line to be. And you can just work back and forth in that line till it's how you want it. How you want it. I'm sounding a little southern this morning. let's just make it a little fancy. Whatever that means. Okay, and then let's do one final pop in this area in the light, just to make things kind of fun. Now, I mentioned color sharing, so I want to look around here and find some cool color that I can implement into the foreground, just as a stylistic decision, something to just make the piece feel a bit unified, even though it's not realistic. And I think I'm going to go for an orangey kind of feel. Now, I'm not going to do straight up orange. I've done that in other pieces, but this time I'm going to orangify the foreground color. So maybe it'll be a little bit subtle still. And let's go like right there and do a little extra fun color. Nice. That's kind of a small thing, but I do think that makes the foreground a little more interesting. One more little swipe. See, I really do need to figure out how to control these things. Good. Okay. Any other opportunities to make the foreground cool? I think I'm going to reinforce a black line down at the bottom of this. And then I might be close to being done with the foreground. Can get to that graffiti again. I'm so excited about my next graffiti project. I may not be able to work on it till a week from now when holiday stuff is slowed down, but I'm real excited. What I'm going to do is I bought some alcohol inks, which I've never used before, so that'll be brand new for me. I think that's not what I wanted. Okay, so what color do I want to put in there instead? My darkish green. Yeah, okay. So alcohol inks. And what I'm going to do is I'll do an under layer of alcohol ink, paint a wet acrylic base over that, and then carve a graffiti word into the wet acrylic. So where the letters are, there'll be these funky designs that are super colorful. And then everything else on the side will be a flat color. I'm really excited to see how that turns out. And I'll try to record my process for, my first or second try of doing that, just so you can see it. You can try it out at home if you want. So now let's attend to the graffiti again. One thing I know I need to do is change my shadow shape in the orange side. The shadow color on the orange side. But I do like the subtlety of these colors on the yellow part of the shadow. And also I want to flatten these brush strokes out. So let's get my yellow shadow color. We're going to flatten, maintaining the shadow shape. Comparatively smooth brushwork. And I'm not really looking at my subject as I do this. I should. But at this point, I've kind of thrown realism to the wind, and I'm more thinking about design. And for some reason, it's easier for me to think about the design of the piece when I'm just evaluating the piece. I'm not sure why that is, but I think I might have just put my palm in some paint. Yep, look at that. I'm not sure what part I touched, but I'm still happy with how everything looks down there, so oh well. Alright, now let's get a better orange shadowy color. So I'm taking what I think is the orange pile, I'm pulling a little bit of it away, and then I threw in some ultramarine blue, some yellow ochre, but honestly the mixture looks green now, so I'm going to have to get to a dark orange a different way. So dark orange is a warm color. Since I'm using primarily the primaries, if I want to warm something up, I add red to it. So I'm going to take a little bit of red and put that into my mixture, and that's how I warm, get closer to the warm side of the family. Yeah, that's looking better. Much better. Let's hold this up and see how it looks. I think it still might be too light, but I do have a very subtle change in value. If I need to go darker, what's my option? Blue. Because blue is the only paint mixture here that's darker in value. So I'm adding blue, that's going to cool it down. But it's also going to make things darker. There we go. Now I can add some more red, which is medium in value. I'm also using a red that's transparent. And transparent paints are the ones you want when you want to mix something dark. Let's do a little test of this and see what I think of it. If you're mixing opaque paints, you might have trouble getting really dark. Yeah, that's not close enough to my orange. It's not going to look right. It's okay. I'm going to save a little bit of it because it's getting me close to where I want to go. But I'm going to mix a fresh orange into a teensy bit of that mixture. So I've got Hansa Yellow Light in there, a little bit of Nephthol Red, and some ultramarine blue, because I always want a little bit of each color in my mixture. That'll give you a more naturalistic color. I think that's probably closer to where we want to be. Let's do another little test stroke. Gosh, I don't know. I'm having trouble evaluating that, actually. Let's do a little bit more and see if it looks good or not. What do I think about that? I don't know what I think about that, actually. Let's keep going. I think it's probably... I think it's too dark. And I think it's too desaturated. Too dull. So let's try again. I think it's worth it for me to get these shadows right. It'll add to the believability. Touch of red. So I've got very little of that original mixture here. Kind of starting fresh with just a touch of it. Okay, let's see if I can scrape away. Palette knife control is a great skill to work on. Excuse me. I really want to do some paintings that are only palette knife in 2020. Awesome thing to be good at. If you want to see someone who is really masterful with a palette knife too, check out Richard Schmid. He's an old dude. He's been painting forever. He's a master. He incorporates palette knife work, brush work. He really is a master, a living legend. And he's got an awesome book. It's called Alla Prima, or Alla Prima 2, I think. He's come out with an updated version. It's very expensive. It's like $100 for the book. I know that's very pricey, but it is worth its weight in gold. And you can always get it through interlibrary loan. That's a trick I use for these big, expensive art books that I want to study. Just get it on interlibrary loan and have 2 weeks of intensive reading. Then you don't need to buy it. I love that trick. Interlibrary loan. You can get just about anything. You can also get these big art books for inspiration. You know, people painting characters from your favorite Marvel movie, or a big collection of all of Van Gogh's paintings, John Singer Sargent portraits, and you can just soak that book up and get some awesome inspiration for $1 interlibrary loan. Then you send it back for some other person to enjoy. It really was a big change for me to start thinking like, wow, I don't need to own every book that I love. And obviously I do own the books that I absolutely adore or want to consult all the time, or are a bit too long for me to read in 2 weeks. But doing interlibrary loan for books is an awesome way to expand your knowledge for cheap. Because book prices add up. That's a little library hack for you on this Christmas Eve. Now I know I'm going to want to soften these edges. I think I might do that after I've gone over everything again. And again, if I can help it, my goal is less active brushwork. Getting close. Do you ever sit down and think of what your art goals are for the coming year? That's something you can do any time of year. Of course, it doesn't have to be around New Year's. But I find it inspiring to take some time and sit and think of what I'm going for. At the beginning of every year, I write out what my goals are in my personal life, in my, physical exercise, business, my relationship with my wife and with my friends. And I write down like what I want. And then at the end of the year, I always look back before I write my new goals. I'll see like, how did it go? Not in a judgmental way, more for curiosity. And as I evaluate how my year was, I'll write down my wins for the year. What did I accomplish in my artwork? What did I get better at? How did I do with my business? And that's really inspiring to intentionally take some time and look back at what Seth Godin would say, what you shipped that year, what you accomplished and did and put out into the world. I think that can be really inspiring. And I try and look at it from a positive slant. Not what I failed to do, not what I could have done better, but what did I accomplish? What did I ship? Honestly, I don't consult that list throughout the year of what I plan to do. I don't know. I thought I might consult that every quarter to stay on track. But honestly, I found that just the making of the goal was motivation enough for me. If you're really logical and driven and your goals are important to you, then, it'd be beneficial to check in with yourself to make sure you're on track to getting there. But I use it kind of as a personal inspiration. Just to be like the kind of guy who's, doing stuff, hustling, wanting to get better. That works for my personality. I know some people might get discouraged by goals like that, though. For some people, it's hard to not see where you didn't add up to what you wanted to be. I respect that. I think that's part of the value of, at the end of the year, me celebrating what I did do, rather than focusing on what goals I didn't meet. That helps me to use the end of the year as a form of encouragement. As a little bit of rah, you did something cool. And obviously I'm the kind of personality that finds a lot of happiness out of doing lots of stuff. Probably to my detriment sometimes. I'm always busy. I'm always hustling because that makes me happy to do that. So your experience may vary. It's kind of what drives Kyle, gets Kyle out of the bed, is being busy. Always been that way and always will be. It's just me. So I'm mixing more orange right now because I've caught myself painting too thinly. I'm skimping and trying to economize my paint. And as much of a hassle as it is to stop your painting and remix, try to get that exact color again, can be worth it. And every time I need to match a color exactly, as much of a pain in the butt as it is, it's excellent practice for seeing color. That's pretty dang close. I think that's good enough. So I got some more orange to play with now. I think I already said this in the video, but going thicker with your paint is an easy way to make the painting look better. Skimpy paint, in my opinion, ain't pretty. Another thing I decided I wanted to do was to make a gradient at this line. I think I still want to do that. So that'll be part of my edge softening towards the end. I go over and change some of the edges I've made. Gotta be careful when you're painting a light color next to a dark color. These dark colors will bleed. Then you have to paint real thickly to conceal it. I'm happy I got rid of the brushwork on this graffiti portion. Makes this feel more like a true background. Okay, so now I'm going to soften some edges. I'm getting the rest of the paint off my brush. And I think I'm going to use I'm going to use a smaller brush for softening. Let's use this size 4. I'll start with these shadows. Okay. Don't know what I think about that. But I'll keep going in gradient. I'll keep going with that after I soften these shadow shapes. Also might do a highlight on the graffiti. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Not sure I love it on the shadow side, but I do like it on the light side. Maybe because those two shadow colors are a little too similar to each other. Let's reinforce this a little bit. See if I can't make it more to my liking. Let's see. Oh, I think I might have gotten rid of my shadow orange. Whoopsie doopsie. Well, it's important. Sometimes it seems like the final stretch of the painting goes so much longer than all the rest. It's probably why I don't like to finish my work to a fine detail. I don't like this part of the painting, but it's so important. Let's see. You know what? I think I'm going to leave it be and chalk it up to experience. My goal is rarely to make the best painting I could possibly make. More often it's to get in the studio and learn. And that's going to be my approach here. I could make this better, but I'd rather start another painting and do that one so much better because of the experience I've got. Just my approach. Got some teal that snuck in there. Okay. Now, let's get some occlusion shadow at the bottom of this graffiti line. That'll show that this isn't floating in the middle of nowhere, but it's a part of this scene. Also give me a chance to make sure the left and the right side are level with each other. Okay, cool. And let's see, what else? I'm going to pass on the highlight. I'll let salty be a background element. But I do think I may go over some of these lines again. like it. I guess in the shadows, I could go a little bit darker. That might add some believability too. I don't have much black paint left. But maybe that'll be noticeable to a fine eye. Cool, cool. Alright, and now I know that I need to do highlights on this salt shaker piece. So let's go for that next. I'm going to use a smallish brush. Get it nice and clean. We're going to be using the solvent-free gel again to make it sticky. And I want these highlights to be the lightest part of the piece. They need to look lighter than the salt. Thankfully, I've saved some room in my value spectrum to make that happen. So I'm pulling a glob of titanium white. And let's look and see. That highlight is a bit yellow. So let's make a highlight that's a bit yellow, still very light. I'll mix the solvent-free gel so that hopefully I can stick it on there and call it good with the first swipe. If I start having to pet around and tweak it, well, you don't want to do that. Let's try and get it right the first time. Okay, so get a bunch of paint. Make your highlight thick. And let's see. Get this stray brush hair out of there. And right there. And then that same vertical line going down, there are additional highlights. There. And there. Noise. I like it. Okay, and then slightly darker and slightly yellower right here on the glass. There's like a curving highlight. I want to get that. So I'll take some of my banana yellow. That's probably too much. Let's neutralize that yellow by adding in a bit of a purpley tone. Okay, here we go. Alright, so my highlight is right here. It curves up like that. A little subtle, but yeah, okay, that's fine. Then we have a white highlight right here in the salt. And I'm just going to use my light salt color for that, if I can find it. It doesn't have the yellowish tone that it might have if it was catching some of our graffiti light. So we'll just get kind of a neutral salt color that I've already mixed. And again, some solvent-free gel to make it stick. Glob it on and a swipe. And then, let's see, anything else? I do see some new highlights on the right side now that it's daytime, but since I painted this mostly at night, I'll keep the highlights on the left side only. And let's see, is there anything else I want to do to this piece before I stick a fork in it and call it done? I thought about going over with the teal again, but honestly, I'm happy with how that looks. Let's see. I'm fine with the softening of my shadows. They're okay. Yeah, I'm good with it. Let's call this done. The last thing I'm going to do is put my signature on the painting. So I use this really fine rigger brush for that. And first, I use the end of the brush to kind of carve in my initial. So you'll see my funny head for a minute. So I've carved my initials there. And then I'm going to paint in my initials with some paint. Sometimes I use a bright red. That's kind of fun. Yeah, I think I'll do that again this time. We'll just use straight up naphthol red. I'm stealing that idea from Stefan Baumann, who's an excellent painting instructor. He does YouTube videos. So Stefan, thanks for the idea. You're great. Steal all the ideas you want. Just make sure you steal from a lot of people, not just one. That's where style comes from. All right. Thanks for sticking with me through this painting. I hope you guys learned a lot from it and enjoyed yourselves. Be sure to stay tuned for future videos, and happy painting, everyone.